Podcasting Q&A for October 30th, 2017. I'm Daniel J. Lewis from the Audacity-to-podcast.com. Thanks for watching or listening. Got some great questions coming up about recording remote interviews and having video. Some questions on Facebook groups, a question about streaming a live podcast, questions about monetizing a podcast, and about looking to grow your audience and where your podcast should be. If that interests you, then stick around and you can ask your own podcasting questions too. If you're watching this live on Mondays at 2 p.m. Eastern Time at the Audacity-to-podcast.com/live, you can post your question in the chat room and I will answer it during this live stream. If you're watching this after the fact, like the replay on YouTube or on Facebook, then email your concise question to feedback@theaudacitytopodcast.com. And it would help if you put question : in the subject line. Please don't put in quick question, but just put in question : and then the basis or the core of the question in that subject line. And then you can have a little bit more detail in the email. That's feedback@theaudacitytopodcast.com. First question comes from Mark Brassette asking, for remote interview recording on PC, what's your current recommendation? Need to only record audio, but would like to have video for the conversational interaction with the guest. This can be a little bit tricky when you're talking about recording audio and having video. Now, recording both of them together, it is actually possible. And the easiest way to do that would be with a Google Hangouts on Air. You would schedule that with YouTube Live, and you would set it as a quick Hangout or a quick YouTube Live event, which would then use Hangouts on Air. This is different from regular Hangouts because regular Hangouts don't have the recording capability in it, and regular Hangouts also don't have the ability for you to set your audio quality from voice mode to studio mode. Studio mode sounds a whole lot better than voice mode. Studio mode will also be in stereo. It won't have any compression or any kind of thing like that. So it will sound a lot more clear. However, there are some cases where that can introduce problems, like either a really quiet voice, or it can introduce other problems where maybe a loop back is happening in the studio mode because it's letting everything through, whereas in voice mode, it does some filtering out of certain things and tries to prevent any of that loop back from happening. So that's one way. But the problem there is you can't always guarantee the highest quality recording. And there's also the chance that you might want split track recording so you can process your voice separately from your guest's voice, and you don't get that with a Hangout audio. You could look at other solutions like Zoom or any kind of online meeting software, and that will do essentially the same thing as Hangouts on Air. It will allow you to see each other while also speaking and talking. Now, that can do the recording for you, but maybe not the best quality or maybe not the best flexibility and versatility with the end recording. So then what I recommend to get the highest quality recording is Ringer. That's at theaudacity-to-podcast.com/RINGR. This is a tool that you can install on your mobile devices, whether Android or iOS, and you can also use it through your browser. So if you're talking to someone, they can use their smartphone, holding their smartphone up to their face so they're a nice close distance away from the microphone. And then you're getting a very high quality recording from them, a high quality recording from yourself too. You could at the same time maybe then do a Skype or a Hangout or a Zoom meeting or something like that so you can see each other during the call. A couple things to keep in mind though. Whenever you're doing video at all, a video conversation with a guest, or especially if you're having them hold a phone while talking to you and you're on video. I know you said you want the video for the conversation interaction with a guest, but a couple, we could call them potential problems with it. One is when people are on video, sometimes they tend to act like they're on video and speak like they're on video. I see this quite often when people live stream, and there's a question a little bit later about live streaming as well. When people are live streaming and they know they're on video, they tend to speak that way to say, hey, check this out. I just got this in the mail and I absolutely love it. And what was the this? Yeah, imagine that you were listening to that, not watching it. You'd have no idea what I was just talking about. And all I did was I said this, and I might point to things saying, isn't this really cool? I can press this and it does that. Isn't that awesome? You should get one too. And if you're listening, you're going, what is it? I don't know at all. And that can happen in video. I hear that even among podcasters when they're on video, some of the back and forth ends up being distracted by what is visible and not described for the audience. So if you are on camera with your guest, it's very possible that your guest may do some of that kind of stuff, and then that makes for worse content for your audience. The other potential caution or problem that could arise from this is anything that's doing video over their computer will hog CPU cycles. And when it's hogging the CPU, that can make the computer much louder, giving background hiss to your recording, especially if their microphone is anywhere close to their device that's doing that live video. So you might end up with a worse quality recording than if you had them do audio only. If it's a guest, make it as simple as possible, really. So try not to complicate it by saying, well, join this so we can see each other, but mute that, and then we will instead have our recorded conversation over this other technology. That can start to get complicated. Try and make it as simple as possible for your guest. Now, for co-hosts, you can make things more complicated for regular co-hosts. And with regular co-hosts, that's when it is a whole lot more important for you to be able to pick up on those visual cues. You can have things like a thumbs up, meaning I'm finished with my topic, or hey, yeah, that's great, go on with what you're saying. You can have a little symbol where you're twirling your finger to say, hey, let's wrap this up. Or you can have some symbol where you're chopping your neck off and saying, hey, let's cut it off, or we're out of time. You can point to your wrist as if you're pointing to a watch there. All kinds of things like that are great for co-hosts. With a guest, they don't need that. That would be distracting. And it's even possible that the video could be distracting to your guest, especially if they see you not looking into the camera and instead looking at your notes off camera and looking at other things and bouncing your eyes all over the place as you're taking care of other things while you're doing the recording. So I don't really recommend it. If you're not going to record the video, then I don't really recommend that you try and get video at all with your guests, because it kind of complicates things. But those are some solutions for you. Basically, to have the video through one service and then your audio is recorded through something else, unless you want to mix everything together. Let's move then, since I was talking about live, let's jump to Chris Enns' question. Chris asked, how does live streaming help a podcast, or help you podcast, or help your podcast, that is? Streaming live can help a podcast in a couple ways. These are the two biggest ones. One, it can make you a better content creator, because when you're streaming live, depending on your approach, you probably know that this is going to go out live. So you learn to get better at communicating. You learn to rely on editing less. Unless, however, you still cover up your mistakes or redo things, and then it kind of hinders the live streaming experience a little bit. We do that with one of our podcasts, our Once Upon a Time podcast. If we mess up bad enough that we need to do an edit point, we mark it, we re-say that thing, and the live audience sometimes enjoys it because they get to see us make mistakes, and sometimes they're quite funny. But it does also hurt the live experience a little bit because it distracts from what we're talking about. However, the whole point of live, really, and this is the second benefit, is to build engagement with your audience. Should your podcast be live? Maybe, maybe not. There are a lot of potential disadvantages to live streaming a podcast recording session. Among them are your distraction with the chat room, distraction of what's going on, the possibility that you might start conversing with the chat room without the majority of your audience having the context. There can be other complications with setting up the hardware for doing it live. And especially if you're doing a monologue, then monologues don't transition so well to live. Who really wants to come and watch you live say the same message that you would share on your podcast and you're not engaging? The reason I switched from doing the Audacity to podcast live on Mondays to now doing these Q&As live on Mondays is because I wanted more engagement. I see the questions as they're coming in. Like Mike Wilkerson asked a couple questions, which I'll be get to in a little bit. And I see the comments come in. I'm engaging with the live viewers. That is what makes a live show good, is if you can engage. But that kind of engagement may not work so well for your recorded show, for what your audience gets later. So keep that in mind with how you host the show, and you may decide that it doesn't help your podcast. It could hurt your podcast to try live streaming. If you're getting too distracted, your co-hosts are getting distracted, you're getting too conversational, and then the majority of your audience who is downloading it later gets only one side of the conversation, and it doesn't make much sense. But there can be cases where if you have a very community-focused piece of content, that you can be live streaming that piece of content, and while you're live streaming, or you're glancing at the chat room, so you can pull in comments from other people and bring them into your conversation. That's what we do with our Once Upon a Time podcast, is while the other co-hosts are speaking, I glance over at the chat room to see what they're saying. And every now and then I see some kind of little nugget that I want to bring in from the chat room into our conversation, like a suggestion, a theory, an observation, something like that. So in those cases, live can help the podcast by giving it more information, more perspective. You can also send things to the chat room in a way for them to look at, but don't wait for that to happen in your podcast. You can even pose it as a question that the chat room can pick up on without you even having to say, hey, chat room, look this up for me while I continue speaking. But you can say, I'm not really sure about such and such. I have to check that out sometime, or something like that. And then someone in the chat room does some quick research, finds it, shares it with you, and then you can share it a little bit later on. Ken Cowan said, listening while waiting for a VA eye appointment in Vermont. I just came back from the dentist not long ago. So if you notice my voice, my talking sounds a little bit strange, that's because I'm trying very hard to not let my teeth touch each other. Because right now, one of my teeth is hurting pretty badly. John Hagedorn asked or said, I'm starting to see Facebook groups forming under popular podcasts, and the ads for them appear on my Facebook page. May we have some insight as to how to manage these and benefit from them? Facebook groups and Facebook pages and Facebook profiles, those are the three main types of presences that you might have on Facebook. A profile would be your own profile. So I have the profile for Daniel J. Lewis. That's where friends can contact me, follow me, and such. There's a page for the Audacity to podcast. That page is what I can use, and that's what I'm using right now for doing this live streaming. The page can also be used for advertising opportunities, and you can do some cool things with a page you can't do with a profile. However, visibility of that page may vary based on certain algorithms, amounts of interaction and such, but live streaming to a page is a great way to build up engagement on that page, and thus make the page show up in more places, especially when you tell your audience, enable those notifications to know exactly when I'm going live, which you should do. When I finish this video, make sure you press that little box if you're on Facebook Live to enable the notifications, stumbled over that one, so that you can see when I'm going live. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, then subscribe and enable notifications there so you'll know when I've uploaded a video to YouTube. Facebook groups, however, are more community focused. So where the profile is about you and the page is about your podcast, the page is also very broadcast focused. You have something, you share it out with the world. People can comment on the page and post on the page and share things with the page and message the page. But the real point of the page is from one source broadcasting it to many. A group is focused on community. There, everyone is on equal playing field in a way. They can start their own conversations and jump into conversations with each other. It's like a forum. So they're starting their own conversations. they're engaging with each other. They could be engaging with you. You could start conversations. You can pin things to the top or have certain documents and certain abilities. You can even live stream to a group. So a group is a nice way to build community engagement if you don't already have a way or don't want that to be on your own website. I really recommend, though, that you not rely on a Facebook group for building your platform in any way, because at any point, Facebook could decide, hey, here are these new terms, and your group doesn't conform to these terms. Or I know of certain places that sell membership to something, and then the members get access to a Facebook group. So they are essentially paying to be a member of a Facebook group. That just, to me, that screams of potential terms of service violation. Last time I checked, and I check about once a year or so, Facebook did not have really any terms of service related to groups, or at least specifically to groups. But it just sounds like something Facebook will crack down on at some point to say you may not charge access to Facebook groups. But then again, they may decide that's okay because when you're on Facebook, you are the product. The customer is the advertiser. So if you are on Facebook engaging, then you'll see more ads, more targeted ads, and the groups help actually with that targeting of ads. So maybe they have no problem with however you join a group. Nonetheless, if you want to benefit from a Facebook group and you realize a Facebook group is the right thing for you and community engagement, this is a good way for you to connect with your audience. Some ways that you could manage this is get people into the group talking about things. And you need to make it not a ghost town. So start by inviting some core people and suggesting they start some conversations. You can start your own conversations too. What you don't want to happen is for it to be a ghost town. Maybe even consider not publicly promoting the group until it seems like it's a self-sustaining, living organism in a sort that people are starting and maintaining their own conversations. You don't have to do that. And then when you inspire or when you promote it, other people will come in and see, wow, there's a lot of activity here, and they can jump right in. Those groups can be great places to get questions from your audience for your podcast. Those can be good places to build community. They can be good places to get early feedback on ideas, to find people who could be potential guests from your audience. So Facebook groups can be good for that, if you're building your own Facebook group, that is. But along the way, you may discover certain things like spammers and people that do not play well with others. And you have to decide what your policies are going to be. Are you going to allow profanity? Will you allow people to self-promote? How do you define self-promotion? Like if you have a group for podcasters, for example, will you allow people to publish their latest episode of their podcast in your group? What about people who are podcasting professionals? Like, for example, for me, if I joined your group for podcasters, would I be allowed to publish my content since my content is for podcasters? There are things like that you have to decide. If you have a group for affiliate marketers, if someone who has a course, a product, a blog post, a podcast episode, a YouTube video, whatever, if they have content for affiliate marketers, will you allow them to post their own content into the group? Certain things like that. You might want to look for people to help moderate the group as well. And here's a way that you can do that, is look for that person who's extremely active in your group in providing and engaging in valuable conversations. They will most likely make a great moderator. That's how I found a couple moderators for our forums for our Once Upon a Time podcast about the TV show, is there were a couple people who were extremely active and followed the rules, and they had good theories. They had a good head on their shoulders, a good brain inside that head. So I asked them, would you be willing to be our moderator? And they were thrilled to help us in that way. So you can find people from your community to help you in moderating and in guiding conversations and such for you. And there might even be a situation, though, where you have to completely ban someone from a group. And I've had a situation recently where I had to completely ban someone from one of my websites because they were causing way too much trouble like freaky levels of trouble that they were doing. Ken Cowan said, Facebook Messenger will be big. I'm building a bot promo for local businesses. Facebook Messenger, is really a whole separate thing to itself, even, that there are many different ways to use Facebook Messenger. And in my opinion, is still not completely decided on that. Because what can happen with a Facebook Messenger, if it's an AI bot where it's designed to intelligently respond and such, there's always the chance that it won't get something correct. There's also the chance that this is encouraging more people to contact you through Facebook. If that's not a channel you want people to contact you on, then you're sending them there to contact you, basically, by encouraging use of a Facebook bot. And personally, I don't like being on Facebook all that often. I actually have a plugin that limits my time on Facebook because it can be a time waster and a distraction for me many times. To the chat room, Mike Wilkerson said, not to shine more light on you than you're already doing yourself. Everyone should check out your Zoom H6 information pack /academy experience that was superb, detailed, and will be a forever resource for me and my efforts across both of my terrestrial podcast studios and my mobile podcast capture studio. It's great stuff, especially for those looking for detail about remote recording of all kinds. Well, thank you, Mike. I didn't realize that wasn't a question until I read it. But yeah, I have a Zoom H6 for podcasters course. It's at theaudacitypodcast.com, and it's a complete course that teaches you how to use the Zoom H6 for podcasting. None of this stuff about how to use it for music. It's all about how to use it for podcasting, like even about how to do a mix minus Skype recording and stuff that, I'll tell you, the people who made the Zoom H6 put out a video explaining how to record Skype. They're actually wrong in their video. They give you instructions for a bad way to do it. So I don't recommend that. Here is Mike's question. He said, what's the best pipe-in audio to my GoPro Black Edition units when recording remotely? This is a bit out of my normal area of expertise. So what I'm going to do is look up the GoPro Black Edition. If there is, well, it really depends on what kind of audio and what kind of situation are you recording. Like, is this something where you have the GoPro mounted since it's an action camera? Do you have the GoPro mounted in some way that you need it to capture audio from around you? Like, are you walking around? Is this walking video, anything like that? Or are you just using the GoPro as a camera and you want audio to go into it? If you're using this for experiential or environmental audio or video of some sort, then Sennheiser makes a fantastic microphone that plugs right into the GoPro and is just as durable as the GoPro. And it sounds a whole lot better than the microphone built into the GoPro. I can't remember the exact name of the microphone, but it's from Sennheiser and it's for the GoPro, and that might be enough to look it up and find out. But with that, like, for example, it's internally shock mounted. So right now, if you put a GoPro on your helmet while you're riding a bicycle, you'll hear all this rattling noise of the GoPro and the vibrations making its way up into the microphone. But you connect this little microphone to the GoPro, and it sounds a whole lot better. You don't get that kind of vibration. You also don't get the muffled sound that sounds like you're picking up audio from inside of a plastic box. If you're looking for audio for other potential uses, like to actually try and record studio audio, then it really depends on what kind of input plug is on the GoPro. If it's a standard TRS 3.5 millimeter, so it looks like a stereo plug, then almost any lav mic or any kind of mic that goes out to a 3.5 millimeter will probably be okay. Some things to keep in mind with that is you're not going to get good quality with a studio microphone going directly into a 3.5 millimeter input, because these studio dynamic microphones need some gain added to them. And if they don't have a good amount of gain, they won't do well. Condenser microphone needs phantom power, which is 48 volts. Little lav microphones need only 2.5 volts, I think, or 1.5 volts. It's somewhere around there. Plug-in power is what they call that. And most devices can provide that so that it powers the microphone enough. And that might be more comfortable for you, especially if you're using this for video. Then you don't have this big microphone in your face like I do here in my live videos. But you can have something that's a bit more comfortable. So you're using the GoPro maybe for a selfie video or something like that. A lav mic could work great for that. The cheapest good lav mics I know are these three. The JK Mic J044, the Aspen mic, I forget the exact model number, but get the one for the Sennheiser wireless. It has this little screw thing on it, but that still works fine with most other systems. And then the third one is the Giant Squid Audio Labs lavalier microphone. And each of those are good, record good quality. They're pretty durable, nice small size. The Aspen mic is probably the best of those three inexpensive ones. And these are under $50 or around $50 and less. So that might be a good option for you. KJ said, monetizing my podcasting. What steps do I need to take? For your podcast, if you want to monetize your podcast, think most of all about your audience. Don't think about you. Don't think about your wallet, your pockets. Think about what is valuable to your audience. And this can be tricky sometimes. You have to really focus on it. Now, this could mean it's simply products or services you recommend. It could mean some specific company that you approach to sponsor your podcast. It could mean something that you make yourself. My favorite methods to make money from a podcast are making your own product of some sort. That product could be educational, like that's what I do. My Zoom H6 for Podcasters course, my SEO for Podcasters course, mypodcastreviews.com, podcastersociety.com. These are all products or services that I have made for podcasters. So here's the cool thing. Take the Zoom H6 for Podcasters course, for example. It's my most recent course. It's available for only $79 at this time. 1,000 people could buy that course, and it doesn't cost me any more time. Yes, that does mean the potential for 1,000 people asking questions, but of the, I think, 100 people who have gone through that course so far, it's been so thorough, and I believe I explain it well enough that there haven't really been any or many questions. I think maybe 2 or 3 questions out of 100 people. So if we multiply that to 1,000, then I might get 20 or 30 questions. That's totally manageable. But see, the potential ceiling for serving a certain number of people is much higher. I could sell that course 1,000,000 times and it not make my workload all that much harder, because I did the majority of the work when I created the course. It took me 2 months to create the course. I thought I could do it in 2 weeks. It took me 2 months to record, edit, do all the research, the testing on the Zoom H6. It's a thorough course because you probably know how thorough I am with stuff. So, and also the numbers for that work out quite nicely. 1,000 people purchasing a $79 course. Well, with simple math, that means $79,000. That would be really nice to have if 1,000 people would buy it. I'm not expecting 1,000 people, but see, that's one product. And now that I've done the hard work on that, I don't have to keep doing hard work on it later. I might promote it here and there. I might put it on sale. Maybe, probably not though. It's already earning money. It's passive income now that I've done the hard work. There are other things like that too, like with Podcaster Society. 1,000 people could join Podcaster Society and it doesn't take me all that much more work. It scales a whole lot more. And what's really nice about these things is that because you are building your own reputation, your authority, and people are becoming, are starting to trust you and feel like they know you, when you create a product, they'll be more likely to get it from you because they already know the value and expertise that you provide, or whatever that value is that you provide through your podcast. For example, one of the members of Podcaster Society signed up on the first day when I opened it, and he told me later, I didn't care what it was. I knew as long as it was under this price and it was by you, I knew I'd be buying it. And that's awesome. That's the result of years of building a relationship, building authority and influence. And I'm really glad that the product was relevant to him. And he's still a member today. He's been a charter member for all of these years that Podcaster Society has been around. Well, 2 years now, just over 2 years. And he's been a faithful participating member and getting a ton of value out of it since then. So think of building your own products. Now, even if you don't have an informational podcast, there could still be informational types of products you could create. For example, if you have a TV show fan podcast, this is one of my favorite examples to use. One of the things that you could make would be the unofficial complete commentary on a season. For example, Once Upon a Time, we do a podcast about that TV show, and it's now come back for its spinoff, otherwise known as the 7th season. And that podcast or that TV show has come out on Blu-ray and DVD, and each season they've had commentary from producers and some of the actors, but it's been quite disappointing. Usually 22 episodes in each season. And of those 22 episodes, 5 would have commentary. But on this more recent season, the most recent season 6, 1 episode had commentary. And at that point, it's almost like, why even bother? And it wasn't even a pivotal episode for it either, which really bothered me and the other fans of the TV show that we didn't get better commentary. So what you could do if you have a TV show fan podcast is you could make the unofficial commentary for the TV show, where maybe it's several seasons later, or maybe the TV show is even coming to a close, and you could go back and record your own commentary, not letting the audio from the episode play into actually be recorded in the commentary, but telling your audience, okay, press play on us at the same time that you press play on the TV show. And you are commenting on it with your knowledge of the TV show because you're the nerd. You know what happens later in the season. So you can point out things in the commentary to say, hey, see that thing right there? We see that used in 2 seasons from now. That thing pops up again and it's used by such and such character. That's something really cool that you can do. It really frustrates me when on these commentaries, they talk about that one specific episode as if you've never seen the episode. It's like, come on, who watches the commentary before they actually watch the episode? Almost no one. So please, it's okay. We've already watched the episode, spoil the episode, and most likely they've watched the entire season too. So it's okay to spoil the end of the season. It would make for much better commentary. So you can do that. You can make that kind of thing. Even if you have a video game podcast or something like that that's more entertaining focused, you can teach something and turn that into a product. Other things that you could do are make products that help people or let people represent. They could represent somehow that thing that you're podcasting about. You could make t-shirts or mugs or coffee cups or the thermoses, or you can make other things, hats, swag of any sort, jewelry, anything like that that allows people to represent in some way. And they could be representing that thing that you're podcasting about, or they could be representing your podcast. I just became a knight of the No Agenda Roundtable. I donated enough during their special 10-year anniversary that I became an instant knight. And one of the things I'm looking forward to is getting my Knight of the No Agenda Roundtable ring. And I'm going to be wearing it probably on my pinky finger on my right hand. And I'm looking forward to wearing that ring. And that's something that'll be fun. It's representing. So there are plenty of other ways that you can monetize your podcast. And what I didn't mention is sponsorship, because you really need to have either an extremely valuable audience or an extremely large audience to really do all that good with a sponsor. You may get $100 or $1,000 for your small audience from a sponsor, but if they don't get that money back in the customers that they get from you, then you're not going to be worth it for them to renew. It's better to take a lower rate and build a long-term relationship with a sponsor than to try and rob them or rip them off at the beginning and then they never come back and then they never advertise on any podcasts ever and they decide podcasting isn't for us. The other way you can monetize that's really easy is with affiliates. You're recommending products that are relevant to you, to your podcast, and to your audience. But when you do so, you ask your audience to purchase through your affiliate link, and you do have to disclose that it's an affiliate link and that you get compensated in some way. And that can be huge for you. When I mention WordPress themes for podcasters or certain plugins for podcasters or tools for podcasters that I truly believe in or test, or sometimes I even say, don't buy this, or here's why I don't recommend this, people still end up buying it from my links. I'm informing them, I'm sharing valuable content, relevant content, and saying, here's a link you can use to buy this. And if you purchase through my link, then I get a portion of that purchase price and it doesn't cost you anything. People will often do that because they want to support you. So look at affiliates, look at making your own products of some kind, maybe consider sponsors, but really pursue other things first. But the big thing before all this is know your audience, know what they need, know what they can afford, and know what's relevant to them. If you have the bottled water sponsor, okay, bottled water may be relevant to almost everyone, but does it really fit your podcast? You'll have a lot better success recommending something that fits your podcast and your audience and your topic more. Justin said, I'm looking to expand my audience as well as monetize it. I have my podcast on Google Play, TuneIn Radio, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and my website, thesportsrotation.squarespace.com. Do you have any suggestions? Well, I covered some of the monetization stuff. And one other thing to consider with this is make a podcast that's so good that it will be easy to monetize. And a big way that you can monetize, I mentioned No Agenda. They don't take sponsors. They don't do affiliates. They don't make products. They monetize through donations. And they get a whole lot in donations. And they make it fun for their audience to donate. They are a great model, regardless of what you think about politics or anything. And No Agenda is fairly in the middle of everything. They'll make fun of whoever, not make fun of, but they'll critically think and deconstruct the words of anyone, regardless of party and affiliation and sponsors and advertisers and such. But they are a great example of getting support from your audience. You are giving value to your audience, so your audience gives value back. And they do this really long sponsorship thing. And their latest episode, or not latest at this point, but their 10th anniversary episode was, I think, almost 8 hours long. I listened to the whole thing. And most of it was their thanking their audience who donated to be part of that 10th anniversary episode. Okay, back to Justin's question, though, about growing, expanding his audience. He said he's on Google Play, TuneIn Radio, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and his website. Did you notice one was missing? Apple Podcasts, or formerly known as iTunes. And sure enough, I thought maybe he just forgot to mention that one. But I searched for his podcast. It's not there. So, Justin, that's a big, major place your podcast needs to be is in Apple Podcasts. You get in there by going to podcastconnect.com. That's with an S in the middle. Podcastsconnect.com. Submit your podcast to Apple, and that will put it in iTunes in the Apple Podcast app, which that right there is a huge platform to be in. And then that helps your podcast then to automatically go out to several other podcast apps. So that's the passive way of doing it. Some other things to do. Well, you mentioned you're on Google Play, which is good. TuneIn Radio, that's good. SoundCloud, waste of money. Stitcher, and on your website. You could also, on your website, you have a subscribe on Google Play. Replace that with a subscribe on Android.com button that you can generate over there at subscribeonandroid.com. That's more compatible with more Android devices. It's just a much better experience. Also, with your website itself, thesportsrotation.squarespace.com, make that simply thesportsrotation.com, or whatever domain is available for you to use, so that you're not having to point people to Squarespace, because what happens if you someday leave Squarespace? Then thesportsrotation.squarespace.com doesn't work anymore. And then on your site, you can have the explanation for how to subscribe to your podcast. But the best thing to do for expanding your audience is equip your audience to expand your audience. Make your podcast so good, your audience will want to talk about your podcast. They'll want to tell other people about your podcast. Involve your audience too, because when you involve people, they get excited and want to tell other people. For a few months now, I've been doing an experiment with reading my podcast reviews for the Audacity podcast, and I would give shout outs to the podcasts whom I mentioned, who left let me say that again. I give shout outs to those podcasts hosted by the podcasters who write reviews for my podcast. And I read a description. I used to play a little sound clip from their podcast, but that was getting too complicated to try and get those. So now I just read the description of their podcast from Apple Podcasts, and I link to their podcast in the show notes when I can, when they've mentioned the name of their podcast, when it's possible to do that. So that kind of thing, first of all, that's generated a whole lot more reviews because everyone else is thinking, I want in on some of this action. I want my podcast linked to and my description read out and such. But what's really cool to see is when someone hears their own podcast review read, most of the time they end up getting excited about it. And I see them sharing it on Twitter and other social groups saying, hey, we got a shout out in such and such podcast. Go check it out. Boom, right there. Evangelist for my podcast. So engage your audience, and that turns them into marketers for your podcast. And this also applies to Ken Cowan's question in the chat right now, asking about marketing and promotion, is really focus on making your podcast so good that your audience will, without your even asking them, your audience will help you grow your audience. And ask them to do that. Ratings and reviews don't help your podcast rank better. And even if you could rank better by that, ranking better alone doesn't mean your podcast will grow. The ranking is really an indication of your podcast's growth. You don't grow because you rank. You rank because you grew. So focus on equipping your audience. Ask them, hey, share this episode. Tell someone else about the podcast. Show someone else how to subscribe to our podcast. Equip your audience to become evangelists for your podcast. And that will be the most powerful thing that you can do. That's word of mouth marketing. Get other people talking about your podcast and get out talking to other people about your podcast as well. Be active in communities, build relationships. Focus first on giving value before asking people to give value back to you. Derek Grosskirth said, I just hit my first goal today of 600 views in a day via Libsyn. Congratulations, Derek. I changed from sharing my website link to the direct MP3 link in Libsyn. Should I continue to do this? Maybe. I would say this is something that's good to have in your rotation of different things that you use. There are some things to think about, though. First of all, downloads per day, views per day, anything like that that's related to time is a meaningless number. And I'll actually explain that a lot more in episode 330 of the Audacity podcast. So that'll be publishing in mid-November, I believe, if I'm remembering the schedule correctly. I'll be recording it actually after I do this live thing. So downloads per time period, just ignore those numbers because those will always be going up. As long as you publish consistent content, your downloads per time period always goes up. But talking about sharing the direct MP3 link versus sharing your website, well, there are some things to consider here. One is that most people don't listen to an entire podcast inside of a social platform. Like on Facebook, you're competing with cat photos and animated GIFs and other memes. On Twitter, you're competing with cat photos, animated GIFs, and other memes. And I just don't really see people listening to an entire episode on social networks. That doesn't mean sharing a direct MP3 link is bad, although there are certainly bad ways to do it. But unfortunately, you can't really assume they're listening to the whole episode, even though it marks as a download. And there are certain standards to say a certain amount of the file needs to have been downloaded in order to count it as a download. I would really assume that most people who listen through these social networks listen to maybe only the first couple minutes, which is enough to count as a full download. And their computer, depending on how fast their internet connection is, it may actually download the entire episode, but that doesn't mean they'll listen to it. So while you may see the numbers rise, what happens if you stop sharing the link? If you stop and the numbers plummet, then that tells you that those people who were listening during that time that you were tweeting those direct links, they didn't actually subscribe. So it's really important to point people to subscribe to your podcast. And if you're pointing them to your website and they're not playing, then that also tells me that maybe if it's simply a difference of the link that you're pointing them to, maybe their engagement is too low. And so some people might click on a link, not knowing it's a direct MP3 file, and then they stop listening to it after a couple minutes because they don't want to sit down for an hour inside of their Twitter app to listen to something. So it's really better to point them to your website anyway. I know you say you're getting more views or downloads per day because of this technique, but does that really matter if your audience isn't actually growing? I really suggest you point people to subscribe to the podcast. Now, you can still point to that direct MP3 file because depending on how it's shared and such, you might get a little player embedded. That's fine to do every now and then. Don't rely on that, though. And inside of your Libsyn dashboard, you can see the stats for destination stats from Twitter and such, depending on how you've got that set up for your sharing. So if you want to continue linking to an MP3 file, rotate it. Every now and then, link to iTunes, your iTunes link. Every now and then, link to your subscribe on Android. Every now and then, point people to your website. Every now and then, point them to the web page for that specific episode. Every now and then, point them to the specific MP3 file for that episode. Diversify your promotion like that because it's more important that you actually get a subscriber than simply getting some more downloads. A couple more questions in here. Mike Wilkerson said, have felt burned on affiliate links where we are opening up our audience with little or no reporting ability to see what happens after we've opened the door, leading to our audiences in a number of different podcasts. How about some input from a dude at your level? So I think, if I understand your question correctly, Mike, you're basically saying you promoting an affiliate link feels kind of like a black hole, if I understand correctly. And most affiliate programs, the good ones, have reporting abilities in them. And what you could even do, many of them have the ability to track campaigns of some sort. And that campaign could be the name of your podcast. I don't really recommend you get down to the episode specific level. But like on Amazon, for example, you can have a single Amazon account that has multiple tracking IDs. And those tracking IDs then can show up in your reports. So you can see this podcast generated this much income, this podcast generated this much, and so on. Or you could do that with website identities and such. And most services that provide affiliate links do have something like that. So you can see a little bit more detail to know which podcast is representing the majority of your income. For example, with Amazon, I have a dozen different Amazon tracking IDs that I use depending on the website. So I have one for our Once Upon a Time podcast and one for the Audacity podcast. I have a separate one for the podcasting deal alerts that I send over at podcastingdeals.com. So I can see when these things are finished, and a few days after, or a month after, or whatever the time period is, I can see how much money each of these actually generated and know then, is this worth pursuing? Or am I maybe doing this incorrectly? Depending on the affiliate also, and your relationship with the affiliate, there might be a promo code that they use to track things. And you might be able to ask them about the performance of the affiliate code. Like, for example, Libsyn.com, the media host, one of the top few media hosts that I recommend. They give me a promo code that I can use because I don't have a trackable URL. Their system doesn't work that way. But I give you a promo code, and that's Noodle. That gives you the rest of this month and all of next month for free on Libsyn with any of their plans. And when you sign up for that, you save money. It gets assigned to my affiliate account, but I don't get to know how many people have signed up. I don't get to know who signed up, and I don't get to know how much I've earned until I actually get a check from them. Or if I email and ask how many people have signed up with my promo code, then they'll tell me, but I don't ask them for that all that much. I just wait for the checks to arrive. Whereas other systems will go down to the detail of telling me who ordered what. And then I can actually contact that person and say, hey, thanks for ordering such and such. Or, hey, do you have any questions about that? I saw that you signed up. There are some privacy concerns there, I know. So it's something to think about. But nonetheless, the thing that matters to you with affiliates is to see, are you actually earning money? And you'll earn money when that affiliate is relevant to your audience and something that they could actually benefit from. Certain audiences are harder to monetize than others. I mean, like if your audience is kids, for example, kids may not buy all that much. Or depending on your topic, kids might buy a whole lot. It really depends. Like if you have just the Stories for Kids podcast and you're promoting Audible or magazine subscription or something like that, I would guess the return, the sales conversion rate on that would be very low. But if you have the video game podcast and you're suggesting video games that kids could buy, the turnover or the conversion rate might be a little bit higher, but still the kids might just go directly to their favorite retailer to buy those games. So it really depends on your industry and such. Last question then for today is from Jake Terry Robinson, who said, could you explain why SoundCloud is a waste of money? The reason for that, SoundCloud is a horrible media host for podcasting. They're the second from the bottom. The bottom is actually Audio Boom at this moment, but SoundCloud's pretty bad. Their stats are horrible. Their stats do not account for a whole bunch of things out there. Their stats can easily be gamed. Just look up, do a Google search for buy SoundCloud plays. And there are all kinds of people out there who will offer to use some kind of bot or farm to artificially inflate the downloads of stats on SoundCloud. And although you may not do that, that it can be done and shows up in the SoundCloud numbers shows that SoundCloud numbers are almost meaningless. SoundCloud is just not a good place for podcasts. They don't provide you with the tools to do your podcast well. People don't really browse around on SoundCloud for podcasts. They often browse around for music. Even SoundCloud as a company, although it has all kinds of financial problems, they could still rise from these ashes that they're building for themselves. They could still have success. They could still actually make a profit someday, even though they're tremendously in debt and at any moment really could go out of business. But in everything SoundCloud has been talking about, they talk about music. And I really think that SoundCloud going forward will, and does seem to be, only focusing on supporting music, which makes sense because podcasters demand a lot more in technology and bandwidth and such. SoundCloud's system doesn't support the latest iTunes tags. You can't even map your own domain to SoundCloud. Their RSS feeds break regularly. If you have money to waste, then go ahead and put your podcast on SoundCloud as well. But otherwise, it really is a waste because simply being on SoundCloud is not going to help you. Where you host your media does not help your podcast. What you do is what helps your podcast. And SoundCloud is really most interested in your promoting SoundCloud, not your promoting your own platform. I've even done some experiments before where I've done some experience. I hosted one episode of one of my podcasts on SoundCloud instead of hosting it on my regular reputable source. I wanted to watch the stats, and sure enough, the stats on SoundCloud were larger than I expected them to be because SoundCloud inflation and stuff. And that episode getting a lot of downloads suddenly, like thousands of downloads from SoundCloud, resulted in a whole bunch of comments, 100% of which were spam. there are all kinds of bots on SoundCloud, all kinds of nonsense going on over there. It's a waste of money. There are better platforms to use. And you may think, well, wait a minute, on SoundCloud for $15 a month, I get unlimited hosting. Yeah, and they're losing a bunch of money on that. So really, there are so many better options than SoundCloud. It's not a podcasting platform. It's a music platform. Now, you could use SoundCloud as a testing ground for things, like just to throw up some episodes over there to see how they work, get some feedback on things, but it's not good. All right, that's it for now. Thank you very much for joining me for this live podcasting Q&A. If you have other questions you'd like me to answer in the future, then please email me at feedback@theaudacitytopodcast.com. Send a concise question over there, and I'll put that in the queue for one of the future podcasting Q&As. And you can join me at theaudacitytopodcast.com/live, Mondays at 2 p.m. Eastern over there. And I host these live on Facebook and also upload the replays to YouTube. So make sure you're subscribed, enable those notifications, all of those positive things, thumbs up, enable the notifications, subscribe to the emails, subscribe to the podcast at The Audacity to Podcast and such. Now, speaking of The Audacity to Podcast, the next episode of The Audacity to Podcast is going to be, which one is it actually? In a couple weeks, episode 330 will be why monthly downloads and feed stats are meaningless. But then the next episode that publishes tomorrow, or publishes on Halloween, October 31st, will be should you launch your podcast with multiple episodes? And some other great content coming up as well. So that's at theaudacitytopodcast.com, and I'm Daniel J. Lewis on Twitter at @TheDanielJLewis. Check out Podcaster Society if you want to learn how to make your podcast amazing, improve it, and grow it so you can profit. That's popularity, relationships, opportunities, fun, income, and tangibles. That's podcastersociety.com. Thank you for joining me. Keep podcasting.